All right. Hello, everyone. Let's go ahead and get rolling here. This will be our last webinar of our Summer of Savings program pre-season. So the season for most sites starts on June 1st. So this is going to be our last one. So appreciate you all making it. Before we get started, a little quick housekeeping here. So if you have a question that comes up during the training, note that you are going to be muted. So please use the bottom right symbol. It's this 9-dotted icon. If you look at your Google Meet page, you'll see down in the bottom right this icon. And if you hover over it, it says meeting tools on it. And if you click on that, it's going to give you some tool options. And one of those is going to be Q&A. So if you click into Q&A, this is where you can submit a question by hitting ask a question. So feel free to submit them during the webinar or during the time at the end of the webinar that's dedicated to Q&A. I will try to answer them as best as I can. If there's anything I can't answer during this meeting, I'll go ahead and follow up with you. This is a pretty big topic, so a lot of variability here. So if there's anything site specific, I might need to follow up individually anyway for the sake of time. All right. So today we're going to be talking about time of use and market rate pricing. Variable cost, automated response. These are two interesting topics that we've lumped together because time of use and market rate pricing are actually very similar in concept, but very different in how you typically react to them. So what we're going to cover is, first off, what is time of use versus market rate? What is the difference there? How do those charges actually work? And we're going to kind of go over that in a general sense. How Atlas responds to these signals, what to do when things don't go to plan, and where to see the cost impact inside of Atlas. And then finally, we'll have our Q&A time slot. All right, so first off, time of use versus market rate. So it actually is how it sounds in the name. So time of use is about how much you use during a specific time period. That is how much you're going to be charged. So there's these different rates that apply to set time periods. So the plot I have on the top here is for a facility that has time of use rates. And you'll see that their rates vary in this very predictable step pattern. And that's because their rates are time bound every single day for this facility. During specific hours, they have rates that apply. For some facilities that are on time of use, this might only apply during weekdays, and maybe on the weekends they have different rates. But it's very typical to see this step pattern. That's kind of one way to indicate, oh, are they on time of use? So this is a way for the utility to charge more during the most demanding hours, and give you the opportunity to shift to less demanding periods, cheaper cost periods. Market rates, as opposed to time of use rates, which are very predictable, are more unpredictable. So market rates vary day by day, hour by hour, sometimes 15 minutes by 15 minutes. So this plot on the bottom, this is a real facility's rate. And you can see how it varies over time. Often it'll be kind of flat. You see some variation day to day, but not very large swings. And then all of a sudden you'll see some spikes. So that can be driven by a variety of things. Typically when there's a lot of demand on the grid and, supply and demand, it gets more expensive when a lot of people want that power. So they spike up the price, which gives you an opportunity, for one, to avoid spending money, but also an opportunity, if you don't reduce your load during that time, to be charged a lot of money, because those are much more expensive than your typical rate. You might wonder why folks opt in to do a market rate. With a system like Atlas that's able to monitor these rate changes and proactively respond to them, you actually can end up paying less money, because outside of those periods, the rate may be cheaper in general. Where they get you is on those high spikes. So it can be beneficial if you have a system that sets you up with the ability to respond to them. So that is the difference between time of use versus market rate. One other note on market rate, it can be something that's set a day ahead of time. So you might have 24-hour notice as to what the rates are going to be for the following day. Or you can have rates that change literally day of their varying with very little notification ahead of time. So those are even harder to avoid high costs for. So it varies a lot, but having a system like Alice helps you react to that. Time of use, pretty common like in California. So for any of you that may be familiar with California, typically their most expensive time periods are 4 to 9 p.m. So it's a little easier on that front to be able to avoid those high costs because they're so regular. All right, I'm now going to talk about the different types of charges that you have at your facility. So first off, energy usage charge. This should be very familiar to you guys. It's basically your kilowatt hour consumed over a billing period. So let's say that your utility does a straight like first of the month, end of the month. How much kilowatt hour did you consume during that time period? And multiply it by this rate, so $1 per kilowatt hour to get your cost. So every month this is charged. It's typically going to be on your total kilowatt hour used during that billing cycle. So you'll see it on your bill. And how that rate is set is, first off, the utility rate tariff is filed. They approve it with the regulator, and it's fixed for the season/tariff period. Your demand charge, very similar in terms of how it's set and how it's charged, except for instead of looking at your energy accrued over the time period that we're looking at, this is actually your maximum peak kilowatt during that billing cycle. Often that's going to be like your top 15-minute interval during that full time period. So if we're looking at a month, it's going to be the 15 minutes where you use the most power on average during that time. And they're going to take that 15-minute kilowatt and they're going to say, this is your max peak demand for this time period. And then every month, they're going to take that max kilowatt and they're going to multiply it by your dollar per kilowatt rate. And that's going to be your demand charge. Again, similar thing where this is filed and approved by regulators, but it can be quite a cost if you do not manage your demand very well. All right, so I wanted to set that up so y'all can understand like kind of how these rates apply, but that's not really the focus of this. That should be something that you're fairly familiar with. But let's talk about how it works for a time of use energy charge now that we understand how energy charges work and how you get the actual cost applied to you. So for time of use, they're still taking that same kilowatt hour, but they're going to look at it during different segments of time. So instead of looking at, okay, for this whole month, you used X amount of kilowatt hours, and I'm going to charge you one single dollar value for this based off of one rate. Instead, they're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to look at how much you accumulated during these different time periods, and I'm going to charge you differently based off of those different time periods. I have two examples here of summer and winter. Typically, summer is a little more aggressive than winter because winter demands are lower. You don't have as much stress on the grid. So in the summer, what I have diagrammed here is a peak period in orange. This is when it's going to be most expensive. Your mid-peak periods, these are buffering, in this case, that peak period, both before and after it. So, you know, it's not like all of a sudden at 4 p.m. it becomes super high stress on the grid. It gradually ramps up and ramps down. So you have these other periods that are also kind of higher demand, but they're not as stressed as the peak period. And then you have your off-peak periods. These are going to be your cheapest times to use energy because there's not as much stress. So the idea is we want to shift as much load away as possible from those more expensive periods. Most important time period to skip out and avoid using power is that peak period. Then secondary is your mid, and then your off-peak periods is when we do want to use energy. Winter, it's a little different. You have, in this example, you have two peaks that are outside of that kind of same structure, you have them split into two, where in the morning it's a little more demanding and in the evening, a mid-peak throughout the middle of the day. Again, this varies based off of your tariff. So if you're curious about what your rate structure is, I'm going to show you where you can actually visualize it in Atlas. But as you can see, you still do get hit with higher costs during the winter during certain times of periods for some time of use tariffs. It really depends what program you're signed up for. But generally, the actual dollar per kilowatt hour during the summer is much, much higher. So there's a lot more opportunity to save and also a lot of opportunity to pay a lot of money. All right, so a variable rate charge is different. So instead of having those blocked out time periods of the day, one thing that you're going to see is that the rates are going to vary day by day, hour by hour, and the kilowatt that you use during that time sets the cost. So literally that time period when you used it, there is a cost associated with it. So if I use 100 kilowatt hours over the 4 to 5 p.m. period, it's going to be charged based off of the rate that occurred during that time period. So as you can see, that's a little more complicated. Now we're looking at every single chunk of time period. There's intervals that they're looking at and different costs per every interval. So ideally, we want to try to avoid those high cost periods and try to use energy when it's cheapest. You do get into some days, like this example actually comes from the polar vortex situation that happened in January, end of January, early February. You can see rates were really low. And then all of a sudden during this extreme weather event, we had rates spiking and increasing and varying quite a bit. So then your strategy kind of changes because you're like, well, I do want to avoid the high cost, but I do have to run. This is multiple days of increased rates. So then it's a game of avoiding how much you use during the highest periods versus the lower periods and trying to even that out. One thing that I am going to jump back to this on that I didn't mention, but meant to mention, this applies to energy charges, but it can also apply to demand charges. So depending on your tariff, you might have a time of use energy charge and a time of use demand charge. So that's important to note because demand, obviously, we were talking about that max demand being set during a month-long period. Well, this is looking at what was the max demand set during your time of use period, but then also your maximum during the month. So that's another way you can be exposed. This is very typical for a California site to be exposed to something like that. So I just wanted to make sure it was understood that this isn't just energy, this is also peak demand. So just to give you some context around how expensive this can be and what the risk is. So rates can increase from 50x to 100x plus. We've seen this actually play out for market rate facilities. So that's a lot of rate increases during a pretty short period of time, which if you don't skip that period, if you don't avoid using energy during that period, you can be hit with a very large bill. And we've seen costs spike beyond $50,000 over a couple of hours. So there's a lot of opportunity here to avoid those types of costs. And it's really important if you are exposed to market rates to make sure that you're avoiding it as much as possible and letting Atlas do its thing by avoiding those time periods. All right, so how does it actually work with Atlas? So we have the rate data being fed into the Atlas program. So kind of like this diagram is showing, we get information from third parties. So we're feeding in the actual rate information from the utilities into our cloud system, where it uses that to, within our cost optimization engine, determine the best way to minimize cost. That's usually our goal, is to minimize cost. And it does that by taking in the rate information, taking in the weather information, taking in the grid information, and in addition, taking in information from your facility. What are the facility limitations? What are the current conditions that you're running into? And it uses all of that to come up with an optimal solution to avoid high cost, try to minimize as much as possible. And it's either going to do that by issuing a shutdown event, or it's going to load shift to avoid the high cost. So it really depends on what your system's configured for. If you can't do shutdowns, or we can't do a long enough shutdown to avoid it, it might be that instead the system chooses to load shed aggressively during that time period to at least drop off as much power use as possible. If you have market rates and they're spiking all over the place during the day, we might not be able to do a lot of little shutdowns, but we may be able to drop off a good number of evaporators during those times to drop power use. So it's going to try to do the best that it can to minimize costs. Some things that you might notice. So one, temperature set point changes for load shifting. So when we're talking about pre-cooling before a shutdown or shedding during high cost periods, that's going to be accomplished by operating within the minimum and maximum set point ranges that you have provided in Atlas under the demand stabilization application. So in the kickoff meeting, we talked about how important it is to provide as wide of ranges as you can. The reason being is that we do want to be able to pre-cool well before shutdown so that you can ride out those periods where your freezers or your compressors are off. And then in addition, we want to be able to shed if we can't shut down. So being able to increase the temperatures in the space to your maximum. Ideally, that maximum is an accurate maximum that you can operate at without hurting your temperatures or hitting a limitation, but being able to shed a good amount of power based off of that. You will typically have 24-hour notice for shutdowns. If you are exposed to market rates, it's possible to have something day of. It depends on the type of rate structure you're on. A lot of times folks are getting day ahead rates. But if you have one that's day of, it's possible that you might get a shutdown issued during the day. If you are subscribed to text and email alerts, you will get a text or email letting you know that an event has been scheduled. So you have the opportunity, if you have a problem with it or anything, you could skip that shutdown or pause shutdowns, but it lets you know immediately what's going on since these are a little more variable and you don't know exactly when it's going to happen if it's a day of market rate. But I think the vast majority of folks are more likely exposed to the 24-hour time frame. And for sites that have time of use, oftentimes we're doing daily shutdowns. You have a very reliable time period when you know it's most expensive to operate. So typically in those cases, we're going to do a daily shutdown to avoid that time. So with that note on time of use, what if you miss a time of use high rate period or are unable to shut down for a high rate period? So it depends what kind of rate we're talking about. For energy, that's okay. I mean, you constantly get new opportunities and it's all about the accumulation of energy you use during those time of use periods. But for demand, that can be a bigger deal because it's set once a billing cycle. So first off, Atlas is going to do the next most cost optimal thing it can do. So Atlas is constantly looking at, okay, what am I doing? What have I done? And what am I going to do? Or what do I want to do? And it's going to use that information to constantly update what it wants to do in the future based off of what's going to be most optimal. So if things start going wrong at the site and we're not going to be able to shut down or we're not going to be able to do something, it's going to adjust its strategy in accordance with that. So that might be load shifting being reduced. Load shifting to reduce as much load as possible. So say in the event where you have to skip a shutdown, you might opt to at least still load shed in terms of like putting evaporators at their maximums to at least reduce the amount of power being used. It then also might prioritize a second most optimal shutdown time. So say you're exposed to multiple high rates during a day and we were trying to target the most expensive period. You weren't able to hit that. Then we're going to say, hey, can you do this next period that's also very expensive? Maybe you'll have enough recovery time or whatever issue you're running into. Let's try for this other one. So it's going to try to do the next most optimal thing. And then it might prioritize another rate to limit costs. So this comes up for time of use often. So because you could have time of use demand costs, so based off of your peak demand, and you can also have time of use energy costs at the same time. So let's say that we have a time of use peak demand window shutdown that's missed. Peak demand is set once a month. And once you set a high one, the best thing you can do is just try to avoid being that high. But if you've been shutting down and getting 0 kilowatt during every time of use period, and then today you can't shut down and you set a 250 kilowatt demand, that's it for the rest of the month. So what Atlas is going to do is prioritize minimizing the next largest cost impact, which, let's say you have a variable energy rate or a time of use energy rate, is going to say, okay, my maximum demand charge is set. That is lost. I'm not going to keep trying to hit that because now I need to prioritize this other thing while also keeping it below that maximum demand. But let's see if I can do something different. And in that case, it might be instead of shutting down overall, reducing energy usage during those time periods, being a little less aggressive with pre-cooling. It's going to make those decisions for you so that you don't have to. This can be kind of complicated. Like as an individual, if you're looking at rates, it's very difficult time of day to like second by second, not second by second, but hour by hour trying to make the best decision you can. I have sites in California that'll call me when they're worried that they had to skip a shutdown. Like, what should we do now? We missed this. Like, we know our rates, like our demand set for the month. What should we do now? And luckily I get to give the answer of like, Atlas has it, just let it do its thing. It's going to switch to focusing on energy rates. So the best thing to do is leave things enabled in Atlas, leave your Energy AI apps enabled, leave building shutdown enabled and demand stabilization enabled, so that it can try to do the best it can given what you've already been able to accomplish for that time period. All right, so what to do when things don't go to plan, other than just let it do its thing. One, if you have to skip a rates-based shutdown for any reason, the first step is communication. So management wants to know, say your GM, maybe your regional managers, your facility manager, let them know what's going on and why you had to skip it. Keeping that in a silo and not communicating it out doesn't really open up the opportunity for folks to help you. So it's important to communicate that. And then later on, when you see a high cost on the utility bill, everybody knows and was expecting that to happen because they understood there was an issue. No one's going to be upset that you had to skip a shutdown because temperatures were out of spec or that you had a safety issue. That it absolutely is number one priority, to keep temps and to avoid avoid safety issues. So, you should be safe in communicating that and feeling like you can escalate issues as they happen. It's also very critical when you do go to, say, skip a shutdown, say you have to cancel one or put shutdowns on pause, to put in a good reason. And by good, I mean something that's detailed enough for somebody to understand. Atlas will prompt you for a reason. Give as much information as you can so that can be shared both with the CK team and externally. If you can't handle a full shutdown, it is the best option typically to shut as much as you're able to reduce overall power usage. So if this is an ongoing issue, I always recommend making a configuration change so that you don't have to manually intervene ever. But if it's a one-off situation where, say, last night the system high leveled, it went down and was off for a couple of hours and temperatures are trying to pull back down and you're trying to recover from that. But you have a time of use demand period from 4 to 9 p.m. You don't think you can turn everything off? The next best thing you can do is try to reduce how high that demand is going to be. So I would recommend potentially taking manual action to try to shed evaporators, take off a compressor, whatever you need to do in order to reduce power. If it's an ongoing issue, you should absolutely prepare for the next round, which means leveraging corporate project teams and CrossnoKaye to identify opportunities to help you participate the next time an event is called. Excuse me. We might be able to reconfigure your shutdown to a partial shutdown or change your shutdown and startup procedure to make it smoother if there's issues like that you're running into. If you have equipment down or a mechanical issue, your project team might be able to help push to get funding to fix it in the case that is blocking your ability to shut down. So overall, the important thing here is communicate. Communicate, communicate, communicate. And if you're curious about how to actually see your performance in Atlas and especially your rates, first off, if you're called for a shutdown, you're going to have the shutdown banner at the top of every page in Atlas that tells you that an event is active or upcoming. It's going to tell you the time and why it's happening. In the Energy AI tab, you're going to have the Atlas shutdowns card that shows you what upcoming shutdowns you have. Now, what I think is really a cool thing that we have this year, it's new, is the facility performance page. What's really great about this for folks that are exposed to variable rates or time of use rates is that you can go in and now see the rate that Atlas is being fed. So this is what Atlas is using to make decisions. And you can come in and see how well you're performing with respect to that. So for example, here we have a little spike in power cost and we have a shutdown. So you can look at what your rate actually is. If you see anything in here that's unexpected and you don't maybe understand it or you don't think something's right about your rate, do let us know. But this is a really useful tool to be able to see like, okay, how well am I avoiding these? Or if you're a time of use site, you'd be able to see, okay, there's these, square wave responses in the rates. Am I shutting down for every one of those? And you can pretty quickly tell which day you didn't shut down because your power will still be high. One thing I'm not showing here is also the demand events page. So that's located within the facility performance section. You can go in there, see when your peak demands were set and the cost impact. This is really useful just for communication, understanding what's going on at the site. So on those pages, it'll tell you for a given time period, say like the month of May, what day was the highest peak set. You can click into that, see the rate associated with that and how much it's going to cost you. You can see the actual power profile of how the power looked during that time, and then a list of user actions. The reason that you have that list is to understand what kind of issues were we running into. Was this something where, people were trying to manually intervene because they were having issues at site, or there are alarms associated with temperatures, things like that, that give you the story of why that event was missed. So I think that's really useful for communicating internally and being able to have a conversation around it. And it kind of gives you that timeline idea of like, okay, what went wrong here and what can we do to avoid that in the future? And as always, if you're running into issues that CrossnoKaye can help you out with, first off, if you have an emergency or an immediate issue that you need help with, please call the support line. That'll get you the fastest response, but this is for situations that need immediate support. If you have something that can wait, submit a ticket. And when I say wait, I mean you submit it and you don't need immediate help. Go into the help center and you can submit a request, and submitting a ticket this way will help us. First off, you can write a pretty detailed message about what's going on and what you're having issues with, and you can put attachments on those. So if you have like screenshots of what went wrong, maybe some trends or logs, you can attach those to give us further information. And then the ticket will be received by our customer service team, and then it can be escalated internally to the most appropriate people to help you out. So if you're not able to do shutdowns, for example, and you think you know what could help you out, you're like, hey, I think if I change my building shutdown strategy to do this or that, maybe instead of shutting everything off, I want to just shut off my freezers. You can submit that in a ticket, and then we can get with you to work through it. Also, if you don't want to reach out to us yet, or you're just not sure, maybe there's something you could do yourself and you want to do that before reaching out to anybody, you can go to our Atlas Help Center. There's a great search bar in there to look for anything that you're having questions about. There's also help articles, videos, webinars, etc., that can help you dig into your problems and see if you kind of self-help. I'm kind of the type of person that likes to self-help first. Up to you. You can also just go straight to submitting a ticket. But if that doesn't get you what you need, again, always bring it back to a ticket. We can support you in any way that's needed. All right, this brings us to our Q&A part of the webinar. If you have any questions, again, you just go down to the bottom right and you're going to see this 9-dotted icon where you can submit a question. and I will see it. So I'll give everyone a second to do that. I'm going to cough for a minute here. I apologize. I'm coming off of being a little sick, so I've got a bit of a cough going on here. So thank you for bearing with me through that. And while I'm waiting to see if any Q&A rolls through here, a couple of other notes. If you are unsure about what rates you're exposed to and what you should be doing this summer season, please do reach out. We can help answer any of those questions, tell you what we're seeing on our end, and make sure you understand what strategy is in place to minimize costs for you. If you're concerned about how your shutdowns have been occurring and maybe not confident about going into this season and how well you're going to be able to do on that first event and maybe want to test it out, please let us know. We can set up a test event. We can run through it, see how it goes. Then if any issues come up, we can address those before it gets to an actual situation where you're exposed to those high costs. So I always think it's better to deal with it now rather than later. Yeah, so we're here to support you at any point. Also, this is the last webinar in the series. So one thing to note, we are going to be sending out links to the other webinars that were recorded. They are going to be available on demand if you weren't able to attend all of them. We know everybody has very busy schedules at the facilities, and this especially is a common vacation week. So if you weren't able to avoid one of the other sessions or have other folks on site that you think would benefit from watching one of these webinars, you can share those around and let them know so that they can check those out as well. Thanks for the thumbs up. All right, I'm not seeing any questions roll through here, so I'm thinking we might not have any Q&A, which is great. I must have explained it very well. Again, if you have any questions that you don't want to ask in the webinar right now and would rather ask us directly, you can always email us at productsuccess@CrossnoKaye.com or hit up our support email, support@CrossnoKaye.com, or of course, submit a ticket. That'll get over it to us as well. So any questions you have or support you need, we're always here for you. All right. Well, I'm going to call it there since I'm not seeing any Q&A questions. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I appreciate it. Have a good rest of your week.